Kicking us off at number 5, 30 Days of Night, 2007. And to be honest with you guys, I still can't understand the lack of critical acclaim that this film received, because in my book it's one of the most faithful adaptations of vampire fiction that I've ever seen. The thing that makes 30 Days of Night so endearing, without mentioning its stellar cast and performance, is that the villainous vampires in the film are so captivatingly original. They're bestial and primal in ways that horror cinema has rarely ever captured. Based on the comic book miniseries of the same name, written by Steve Niles and directed by David Slade, 30 Days of Night focuses on the small town of Barrow, Alaska, as it enters its 30-day long polar night, and it just so happens that a band of ancient vampires turn up on a ghost ship ready for an interruption-free, all-you-can-eat buffet. Josh Hartnett as Sheriff Eben Olsen absolutely knocks this film out of the park, as well as supporting roles from Melissa George, Ben Foster and Mark Boone Jr. 30 Days of Night is violent in all the right places, suspenseful in just the right amount, and a fitting tribute to the devices that make vampire fiction so damn awesome. Coming in at number 4, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, 2014. Now, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that this film probably went under the radar for most people, and with a tagline stating it as the first Iranian vampire western, then I wouldn't exactly besmirch you for not taking note. But if you haven't, what you've missed out on is one of the most unnerving yet beautifully captured demonstrations of vampire cinema in recent times. Written and directed by the awesome American Iranian director Anna Lily Amirpour, and also produced by none other than Frodo Baggins himself, Elijah Wood, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night tells the tale of a lonesome vampire who stalks her prey in the fictional Iranian ghost town of Bad City. The film stars the relatively unknown actress Sheila Van, who plays the title role of the girl, who also turns out to be a corporeal vampire of legend who spends her days in lonely isolation, spooking unwitting pedestrians at night and feasting on villainous criminals just for kicks. I'm going to shoot straight, this film isn't exactly full frontal horror, but where it really shines is in its atmospheric dread and bleak demonstration of the human condition. Also, it's just really good. Next up at number 3, Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992. Alright, if this was a list of literature, then of course Bram Stoker's original gothic masterpiece Dracula would be at the tippity top of this list, because of course it's vampire fiction 101. But if I'm being honest, Francis Ford Coppola's silver screen adaptation, although a horror showstopper, doesn't exactly bite the same necks that other vampire movies do. But that's the downside, because the rest of this film in its own right is a fantastic depiction of our favourite hemoglobin obsessed Count Dracula. Directed by the legendary Francis Ford Coppola and released in 1992, this film emerged during a time when some of horror's greatest icons were getting a bit of a rework, to say the least. And rework it does, steering Count Dracula from a campy, cape-wielding hammer horror figure to a creature steeped in ancient history and dripping with the blood of long-lost generations. Also, did I mention that this film is absolutely stacked? Gary Oldman as Count Dracula, the incredible Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing himself, Winona Ryder in all her glory, and of course the one, the only Keanu Reeves, whose English accent in this film is the stuff of cringe legend, but it's still awesome nonetheless. Coming in at number 2 spot, Interview with the Vampire, 1994. And I excruciatingly pandered over where to place this film, but I think in the end I'm happy with giving it the number 2 spot. For one reason, it perfectly captures the essence of what it is to be a vampire in a much more bleak and existential way that other vampire horror films have failed to encapsulate as well as this. It's also 90s cinema at its peak, and I'm a stickler for nostalgia, so there you go. Directed by Neil Jordan with a screenplay from Anne Rice herself, based on her incredible 1976 novel of the same name, Interview with the Vampire is a tale that spans generations and manages to maintain the blood-soaked gothic horror all the way throughout. The film stars Tom Cruise as Lestat de Lioncourt, who, may I add, is fantastic at playing a psychopathic blood-sucking villain. Who knew, eh? Alongside my man Brad Pitt as Louis de Pointe du Lac, a plantation owner of Spanish Louisiana in 1791, who gets turned into Lestat's new vampire best friend because, let's face it, they're both pretty lonely dudes. This film is fantastic because of the seamless ancestry that it manages to weave throughout its narrative, capturing the immortality of these vicious, pale-skinned, beautiful, bright-eyed killers without breaking a sweat. Not like vampires can sweat, anyway. Or can they? Do vampires sweat? Let me know, guys. Next up at number 4, Only Lovers Left Alive, 2013. Now, quite a few of you called for this film to appear on our next list, and rightfully so, because just like with Afflicted, it seems that 2013 was the year for surprisingly creative vampire horror that seemingly reignited the genre in a strange new way. It's important to note that Only Lovers Left Alive isn't a horror film in the conventional sense, or even in the traditional sense, because it relies on an entirely new perspective to fill the spaces of its horror. And yeah, who would have thought it? Vampire nihilism. Vampirism. Maybe it'll catch on. Written and directed by Jim Jarmusch, the film stars Tom Hiddleston and Tilda Swinton as Adam and Eve, two immortal vampires that have lived countless lives across the ages as musicians, poets, scientists, and purveyors of all the mysteries of existence. In the 21st century, though, things are a little bit different, and Adam and Eve both live in an overwhelmingly different age, where the blood of the human population has been grossly contaminated by the modern environment. This film covers many themes, and it effortlessly says a lot about the human condition without saying much at all, whilst also capturing that ageless enigma of bloodthirsty vampires and the strange, alluring beauty that they often permeate. Again, at first glance, the traditional horror of this film isn't easy to pick out, but instead it manages to give a much needed breath of life into the genre, whilst offering insight into the terrifying existential implications of living forever and the price that comes with it. Also, it's reminiscent of 1983's The Hunger, starring David Bowie, Catherine Deneuve, and Susan Sarandon, which would have made this list, but yeah, I don't think YouTube would like it. Swinging in at number 2, Near Dark, 1987. And now, listen. Guys, I get it. The vast majority of you absolutely love 1987's Near Dark and often ranked it as number 1 on your list of scariest vampire movies of all time. And yeah, I agree with you, because Near Dark is an incredibly entertaining horror experience, and in my eyes it's a more horror palatable version of The Lost Boys, although Near Dark is often forgotten in the shadow of The Lost Boys' success. Not to take anything away from The Lost Boys, because it is awesome. The thing is though, both of these films are very much a product of their time, and when it comes to late 80s nostalgia, the horror experience was often mired in fragments of genre. A little action thriller here, a little dark comedy there, and as is the case of Near Dark, a little bit of neo-western horror gore, which sounds strange, but hey, it works. Nevertheless, I hear you and consider this number 2 spot a worthy fan placement that all you horror fanatics have made happen. Good job, guys. Near Dark, directed by Catherine Bigelow and also written by herself and Eric Red, tells the tale of a group of nomadic American vampires roaming the small rural towns of Midwestern America. Despite having a relatively unknown cast at the time, more importantly, Near Dark has Bill Paxton in one of his most well-delivered roles in horror history, as he plays Severin, an immortal vampire with a gutter mouth and a thirst for bar brawling. It also stars Lance Henriksen as the wizened, grizzled leader of their merry band of vampires, and shows the lengths that immortal, bloodthirsty murderers will go to stay alive on the open road. It's essentially Roadhouse meets The Lost Boys, and because of that, it's awesome. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, Salem's Lot, 1979. Okay guys, I'm gonna level with you. The only reason that this entry didn't make part 1 of this list is because, as I explained, it's technically a TV miniseries, and much like 1990's it doesn't hit the parameters of the term movie. But you know what? What the hell? Throw me out the window like little Ralphie Glick, forget I ever said anything, and give Tobe Hooper's legendary 1979 miniseries the credit it deserves, and stick it at our number 1 spot for the scariest vampire movie ever made, because it is exactly that. We'll just forget the fact that it was released in 2 parts. Hey, whatever, that's fine by me. I remember the first time I accidentally caught a glimpse of that bedroom window scene as a kid, and I was so incredibly terrified that it took me many years after that to even realise it was a story about vampires. I just thought it was about horrifying children in pyjamas floating through the air, and I wasn't about to watch a feature-length rerun of that. But obviously, as I got older and finally had the courage to read the original Stephen King novel of the same name, it was evident that Salem's Lot was perhaps the greatest fictional depiction of vampires in anything, really. Because here's the thing, it manages to strike an incredibly delicate balance, and it's a balance Stephen King intended that Tobe Hooper also managed to capture in the TV miniseries. It gives all the credit to the horror forefathers that predate it. The classic image of Barlow being shipped in a steel crate by his familiar Straker, teeth, pale skin, blood-sucking Dracula, the whole 9 yards. But somehow it manages to maintain itself as an entirely original creation of horror. There's nothing quite like the vampires of Salem's Lot. They're familiar, but they're also strange and remote, and entirely different creation. We don't need to talk about how good Tobe Hooper's 1979 version of Salem's Lot is. Just watch it, it's horror mastery. And I hate to sound like a blackguard, but they don't make them like that anymore. do they?
Coming in at number 5, we have 30 Days of Night. This is perhaps one of my favourite vampire movies, not just on our list, but in general. Controversial opinion. 30 Days of Night is a 2007 horror film based on the comic book miniseries of the same name. The film is directed by David Slade and stars Josh Hartnett and my favourite, Melissa George. The story focuses on an Alaskan town beset by vampires as it enters into a 30-day-long period of polar night. Now, as much as I enjoyed this movie, it did polarize critics, with it currently holding a 51% approval rating, which is the lowest we have on our entire list, sad times. The general consensus reads, while 30 Days of Night offers a few thrills, it ultimately succumbs to erratic execution. However, I disagree, and believe this film to be incredibly claustrophobic and a non-stop anxiety attack from start to finish. Not to mention, I used to live in Alaska, and the winter months can be incredibly dark and isolating, creating its very own unique horror. However, what I will say is that casting Josh Hartnett in the out-of-his-element role was a little disappointing, yet it somehow managed to work. 30 Days of Night ultimately warrants its R rating with genuinely disturbing violence, terrifying monsters, and a haunting score that will linger in your mind for a long time. 30 Days of Night is immensely better than a lot of the vampire movies that have been churned out in recent years, and it's certainly better than David Slade's Twilight saga, Eclipse. Yeah, you heard me correctly, Twilight. David Slade also did Twilight. Coming in at number 4, we have Martin. George A. Romero is considered to be the godfather of zombie cinema, and rightfully so. He is the man behind films such as Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and also Day of the Dead. However, there is one movie that is remarkably overlooked in his collection, and that is Martin. Martin is a 1978 psychological horror film that follows a troubled young man who believes himself to be a vampire. Johnny Amplis, with charm and incredible creepiness, plays the titular character, a lonely man who injects victims with a syringe before slurping on their blood. Lovely stuff. The film currently holds a 90% approval rating, with the general consensus reading, George A. Romero's contribution to vampire lore contains the expected gore and social satire, but it's also surprisingly thoughtful and boasts a whopper of a final act. Martin expertly mixes dark humour with satisfying gore, with Romero approaching this vampire hit with sharp wit and undead force. For the first half of the movie, Martin is unsettling while provoking chuckles, albeit uncomfortable chuckles. However, once the second half hits, the gruesome finale kicks in, and that is something that will linger with you for a very, very, very long time. Coming in at number 3, we have Cronos. From the legendary mind of Guillermo del Toro, we have Cronos, a 1993 Mexican horror film and also del Toro's first feature film. The plot concerns an antique dealer named Jesus Gris, who stumbles across Cronos, a 400-year-old scarab that, when it latches onto him, grants him youth and eternal life, but also a thirst for blood. As Jesus enjoys his newfound vitality, he's unaware that a dying old man, Dieta de la Guardia, has sent his nephew Angel to find the scarab and bring it back to him. But Jesus will not give immortality up easily, even risking the life of his orphan granddaughter. Del Toro does a superb job with his directorial debut, with him diving into vampire lore and tweaking the mythology to his own liking. Rather than a bite to the neck, it is an ancient amulet that latches onto whomever is unlucky enough to find it. The film received critical acclaim by critics for its acting, originality, mythology, religious references, and its balance of horror and drama. It has since been recognised as one of the greatest horror films and Spanish-language films of all time. As of right now, it holds a 90% approval rating, with the general consensus reading, Guillermo del Toro's unique feature debut was not only gory and stylish, but also charming and intelligent. Cronos has some incredibly disturbing moments, including a scene where a mouth that has been sewn shut is opened without any assistance. Yeah, you can see where I'm going with this. You don't even have to love horror to appreciate the gift Del Toro gives us with Cronos, although saying that, it is recommended. Coming in at number 2, we have Rabid. David Cronenberg rarely steers us wrong, and he most certainly didn't with his 1977 vampire classic. Rabid is a Canadian-American body horror that features Marilyn Chambers in the lead role, with Frank Moore supporting. Chambers plays a woman who, after being injured in a motorcycle accident and undergoing a surgical operation, develops an orifice under one of her her armpits. The orifice hides a phallic stinger that she uses to feed on people's blood. Those she feeds upon become infected. Their bite spreads the disease and they cause massive chaos, starting in the Quebec countryside and ending up in Montreal. Now, Cronenberg's most hailed work includes movies such as The Brood, Videodrome, The Fly, and Dead Ringers. However, Rabid seems to have gone under the radar for a lot of people, and that's a damn shame. This is Cronenberg's second feature film and exists within his canon as a telltale exhibition of his raw talents, with him inflicting absolutely horrific horrors on the human body. As of right now, Rabid currently holds a 73% approval rating, with the general consensus reading, revolting, yes, but still an intelligent predecessor to some more moronic efforts in the same genre, as well as remains effectively squirmy, gruesome, and even prescient nearly 40 years after its release. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Near Dark. Catherine Bigelow's dark horror western is a cult classic amongst movie lovers and definitely warrants a place on our list. Why? Because far too many people have not seen this movie and it hurts my soul. Released in 1987, this neo-western horror stars Adrian Pasdar, Jenny Wright, Bill Paxton, and Lance Henriksen, and follows a young man in a small Midwestern town who becomes involved with a family of nomadic American vampires. Near Dark was an incredibly fresh take on a genre that had found new popularity in the comedy genre, and it paved the way for even more iconic movies down the line. However, like many horrors of its time, upon release it was met with scathing reviews. However, time has been good to Near Dark, with the film gaining quite the intense cult following over the years. As of right now, it currently holds an 88% approval rating, with the general consensus reading, Near Dark is at once a creepy vampire film, a thrilling western, and a poignant family tale, with humor and scares in abundance. A remake of the film was announced in October 2006, however, in 2008 it was announced that the project had been put on hold due to similarities in conception with Twilight. Yes, I know it's incredibly upsetting to hear that Near Dark was cancelled because of Twilight.